Okay, to be clear, I'm not talking about the whole Mario franchise. This isn't about how many Mario games there are, the question is how many Super Mario games there are. Within the Mario franchise, there's a distinction that can be made between the mainline games and spin-offs. So like, which games are which? How many games are actually in the mainline Super Mario series? No, really, I promise this is an interesting question. Actually, you know what? Hey, if you're coming into this and you think you already know which Mario games are part of the mainline series, please pause the video and try to count how many there are. You don't have to post a comment with your list or anything, just have your own list of which games you consider to be the main Mario series on hand. Got it? Cool. So for everyone else, I guess I should actually explain what's going on. I'm going to assume you already know, like, what the Mario franchise is. And you probably also already know that there's a series of platformer games at its core. That's the Super Mario series. But despite being an incredibly popular series of games, there is no consensus about exactly which games are part of it. And by no consensus, I mean absolutely no consensus. If you look at Wikipedia, the Super Mario Wiki, the official Japanese Super Mario website, and the official American Super Mario website, you will find at least 6 completely different lists of games. So like, what's the deal with that? This is one of the most popular series of games of all time. How can there be so much disagreement about what games are in it? I'm Misali, and how many Super Mario games are there? First of all, does this question even make sense? Is it reasonable to talk about the Super Mario series as though it's a coherent series of games and to distinguish between Mario games and Super Mario games? Personally, I think it does, but a lot of people don't. See, as research for this video, I conducted a survey asking thousands of people which games they consider to be part of this series, and I got a lot of very interesting results. I'll be citing the results from this survey throughout this whole video. One of the most interesting things was just how many people seemingly think of the Super Mario series as being synonymous with the Mario franchise as a whole. A lot of people down in the other option at the bottom said they consider the Mario Kart or the Mario Party games to be part of the same series as Super Mario Bros. And Super Mario Odyssey and the like. Others said that Super Mario games are simply Mario games that have Super in the title, so most Mario Kart and Mario Party games don't count, but Super Mario Kart and Super Mario Party do. Just to be as clear as possible, the series I'm talking about, the Super Mario series, is one of many series of games within the Mario franchise. It's the series of mostly platformers that includes Super Mario Bros. For the NES and all of its sequels. There's a lot of different names people call this series. The Super Mario Bros. Series, the mainline Mario series, or even just the Mario series. However, the most common name seems to be the Super Mario series, so that's what I'm calling it. So now that I've hopefully cleared up what series I'm talking about here, let's get to actually listing games. I'll start with the fully uncontroversial ones, games that basically everyone agrees are part of the series. To be clear, when I skip a game in this list, it's not because I don't think it's part of the Super Mario series, it's just that there's some statistically significant group of people who don't think it's part of the series. We'll come back to the ones I skipped soon and go over the arguments for and against each one. This list is just a baseline of games that everyone can agree on. The fully uncontroversial games in this series are Super Mario Bros., Super Mario Bros. 3, Super Mario World, and that's it. It's just those 3 games, Mario 1, 3, and World. Every other Mario game is at least somewhat controversial as to if it's part of the series or not. Now, when I first started this project, I already thought that was the case, that those 3 games are the only ones basically everyone agrees are in this series. That's part of why I did that survey, just to make sure I wasn't completely off base with that. And it was extremely validating to see the results, that those 3 games are the only ones that fewer than 5% of respondents said are not part of the series. Of course, that isn't to say that all 3 of these games are definitely part of the Super Mario series. I mean, okay, Super Mario Bros. Definitely is. I think if someone says the Super Mario series doesn't include Super Mario Bros., they're either lying or not talking about the same series I'm talking about. But for the other 2, you definitely could argue against their inclusion. They wouldn't be very convincing arguments, and almost everyone would think you're wrong, but you could. And naturally, I don't think there's anyone who thinks that 1, a coherent Super Mario series of games exists, and 2, the only games in it are Mario 1, 3, and World. However, there are a couple big groups of games that are sometimes, but usually not, considered separate from the mainline Super Mario series. First is the 3D games. The split between 2D and 3D Super Mario games is a pretty noticeable one. So, a significant number of people, as in over 5% of the people who responded to the survey, consider the 3D games as a rule to be separate from the mainline Super Mario series. Although exactly what the 3D games are, if not Super Mario games, is unclear. Some consider all 3D Super Mario games to be one single series, while others divide it up further. The pairs Galaxy and Galaxy 2, or 3D Land and 3D World, are sometimes thought of as mini-series in their own right. The 3D collectathons, Mario 64, Sunshine, and Odyssey are often grouped together, sometimes called a separate series and excluded, or more often considered to be the true form of 3D Mario, with all other 3D Mario games excluded. Although, the Galaxy games sometimes get grouped in with them, and it's just the 3D Place games that get excluded for not being true to 3D Mario gameplay. There's another interesting nuance with the Galaxies and 3D Places. Some people, though not many, consider Galaxy 2 to not be its own distinct game, and think of the two Galaxy games as one thing. However, for the 3D Places, it's more common for 3D World to be counted but not 3D Land, even though 3D Land came first. This is, I think, not a case of the two games being similar and therefore the same game, but rather a case of home console purism, where some people in general believe that for a game to count as a mainline Super Mario game, it has to be for a home console, so handheld games like 3D Land don't count. This isn't a super common opinion, especially now that the Switch makes the distinction between console and handheld games kinda arbitrary, but it's still an opinion held by a substantial number of people. The other set of games that's almost always included but still sometimes debated is the new Super Mario Bros. Series. This one is pretty straightforward. Around 15% of people consider the new Soup games to be a distinct series, separate from the Super Mario series. However, as before, there is nuance here. Home console purism is relevant once again, with two of the new Soups being games for handheld systems. New Soup Wii is the most commonly included of these games, with the others close behind. For reasons I do not fully understand, the original new Super Mario Bros. For the DS was included by fewer respondents to my survey than any of the other three unambiguous new Soups, including New Super Mario Bros. 2 for the 3DS. Hundreds of people said that they consider New Soup 2 to be a Super Mario game, but not New Soup 1. I have literally no idea why that's the case. I know, the reasons you're thinking of right now sound very plausible, and I thought it was those too, but from analyzing the data from the survey, I ruled almost all of them out. It isn't a case of misplaced home console purism, where people think handheld games don't count but don't know that New Soup 2 is a handheld game. It can't be that, because about 70% of people who included New Soup 2 but not New Soup 1 also included Super Mario Land. It's also not just a portion of the respondents picking their answers completely randomly. Within this group, every single one of them also included Mario 1, and over 95% of them included Mario 3. Their most included games, aside from New Soup 2, the game whose inclusion defines the group, line up with the general population, which wouldn't be the case if they were just picking games randomly. It's also not people who think that New Super Mario Bros. 2 refers to New Super Mario Bros. Wii, the second New Super Mario Bros. Game, because over 80% of people who included this game also included New Soup Wii. I also don't think it's entirely explained by people just not knowing what game New Super Mario Bros. DS refers to. New Soup 1 was included significantly less often than New Soup 2, even among people who describe themselves as experts on the Super Mario series. And this is not an obscure game. New Soup DS sold over 30 million copies. So what the heck? Who are these people? What is their reasoning? My best guess is that since I put DS in parentheses after the title of this game on the survey, they assumed that this game is a port of some other game without really thinking about it. Looking at what other games this group is less likely than average to include, there's a lot of other games with parenthetical console names up there. I don't know though, I don't think that many people who are knowledgeable about Mario games in general don't know that the first New Super Mario Bros. Game was the one for the DS. Maybe it's just because I was the right age 15 years ago when this game came out that all my friends were in the target demographic for a Mario game, so this game is better known among people I know than it is among the general population. Anyway, with those games, we now have the set of games that are almost completely unambiguous. Mario 1, Mario 3, World, 64, Sunshine, New Soup, Galaxy, New Soup Wii, Galaxy 2, 3D Land, New Soup 2, New Soup U, 3D World, and Odyssey. These 14 games are all included by almost everyone, with very small groups considering some of them to be separate. Cool, we can now move on to the games where the controversy is actually significant. First of all, there's a pretty obvious gap between Mario 1 and Mario 3. Where's Mario 2, I hear you ask? I mean, you're probably not asking that because the thing with Mario 2 is the single most well-known piece of video game trivia. Just in case you're one of the 6 people who don't know this already but somehow are invested enough in this video to still be watching at this point, there's 2 separate Mario 2s. Just for the sake of clarity, I'll be calling these 2 games by the names they have that aren't Super Mario Bros. 2. So the game that's called Super Mario Bros. 2 in Japan is Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels, and the game that's called Super Mario Bros. 2 in America is Super Mario USA. Sometimes people like to be annoying and pretend that they think the game called Mario 2 in America and Mario USA are 2 separate games, as though the differences between the NES game Super Mario Bros. 2 and the Famicom game Super Mario USA are any more significant than the regional differences for literally any other NES Famicom game. And they're just gonna have to deal with that. Anyway, yeah, pretty much everyone includes at least one of the Mario 2s. Most people include both, and what I had expected would be the case is that there'd be some people who say Lost Levels is the real Mario 2, and other people who say Mario USA is the real Mario 2. And while that is technically true, there's a fourth group, people who don't think either Mario 2 is part of the Super Mario series, and there's considerably more of them than I had expected. In fact, there's slightly more people who responded saying neither Mario 2 is a Super Mario game than people who said Mario USA is a Super Mario game but not the Lost Levels. I think it's understandable why more people include Lost Levels than Mario USA, given the history of the two games that you've already heard before, and excluding the Lost Levels makes some amount of sense too, because it's pretty much Mario 1 again, but with different levels. But what's really interesting is how this compares to the various authoritative sources on the topic. The official Nintendo of Japan Mario website says that both Mario 2s are part of the Super Mario series, which most people agree with. The same is true on Wikipedia and the Super Mario Wiki. But Nintendo of America's official Mario website claims that Super Mario USA is a Super Mario game, but not the Lost Levels. This is the least commonly held opinion about the status of these two games in the series, the one that you'll find at supermario.com. To be fair, it makes sense that Nintendo of America would present it this way. From their perspective, the Lost Levels is an unreleased game. They're the ones who lost these levels in the first place after all, but it's not like this game is completely non-existent outside of Japan. It was one of the games remade in Super Mario All-Stars, it was included in Super Mario Bros. Deluxe, it was released on Virtual Console on the Wii, 3DS, and Wii U, it's part of the Nintendo Entertainment System Nintendo Switch Online service, and so on. And that said, most people do still agree that both Mario 2s are Super Mario games. This next pair of games, on the other hand, has significantly more controversy surrounding it. I'm talking, of course, about the Super Mario Land games. The Mario Lands are a special case in the Super Mario series. They're included more often than not, but they're significantly less clear-cut than the other games we've listed so far. Mario Land 1 was included by about 80% of respondents, and Mario Land 2 was only included by around 2/3 of respondents. There's a few reasons why these games are somewhat ambiguous. The first is, again, home console purism. These two games were both released for the Game Boy after all, but it's not that simple, of course. As early handheld games, the Mario Lands have a completely different vibe from the other Super Marios from the time, mostly due to the limitations of the hardware they were created for. Mario Land 1 in particular was really janky. It was one of the very first games developed for the Game Boys, so naturally nobody on the development team had any experience yet. Another major contributing factor is that the Mario Lands were released during a time when Super Mario games were still being numbered. In Japan, Super Mario Land was released between Mario 3 and Mario 4, and in North America it was released between Mario 2 and Mario 3. So that's a clear separation between these games and the other Super Marios. The other big factor is the existence of Wario Land. Wario was first introduced in Super Mario Land 2 6 Golden Coins as the main antagonist. Wario Land Super Mario Land 3 featured the character as the protagonist, and from Wario Land came a full new series of games starring Wario. Almost half of respondents to my survey said that they consider Mario Land and Mario Land 2 to be Super Mario games, but not Wario Land. The other two most common opinions on the matter are roughly equal, with about 20% saying that none of the Mario Lands are Super Mario games, and another 20% saying that all three games, including Wario Land, are Super Mario games. Most of the other respondents said that Super Mario Land is a Super Mario game, but not 6 Golden Coins or Wario Land. Are these people suggesting that Wario's presence in this game means that Mario Land 2, not 3, is the first game in the Wario Land series? It's definitely possible. However, I think it's more likely that people just haven't heard of Mario Land 2 before. This is one of the lesser known Mario games, and I think someone who can see Mario Land 1 and say that its gameplay is similar enough to the rest of the Super Mario series to count would have to agree that Mario Land 2 is a much more traditional Super Mario experience. Before we move on, I think I should talk a bit more about Wario Land. Why do most people who consider the Mario Land games to be part of the Super Mario series not consider Wario Land to be part of it as well? It is subtitled Super Mario Land 3 after all, so on paper it should count. The most obvious thing about it is that Mario isn't in it. You don't play as Mario, you play as Wario, so this isn't a Mario game, it's a Wario game. And of course, there's sequels to Wario Land. Wario Land is very clearly a whole series of games outside of the Super Mario series. Please keep these facts in mind, they're going to be relevant again soon. For now, we have a list of Super Mario games that I think most people will agree with. It's all the games we had before, plus both Mario 2s and the first two Mario Lands. Personally, I would say this list is complete. There are 18 Super Mario games, simply because there are 18 games that a clear majority of people, over 2/3, can agree are Super Mario games. In fact, this exact list was the single most common response to the survey I conducted. Now that isn't to say that this list represents any sort of consensus. There is no consensus. Even though this was the most common list of games, it still represents less than 2% of everyone who responded to the survey. While most people's idea of the Super Mario series is similar to this, almost everyone's personal list deviates from it slightly. I intend to present the full range of ways that people classify games in this series, and even though I have now given the list of games I personally consider to be part of the Super Mario series, there are still several more games worth discussing. We are now ready to get into the games where there is no clear consensus regarding if they are part of the series or not. At the time of writing, the most recently released game that more people than not would describe as a Super Mario game is Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury. This Switch cartridge includes two games, the Switch port of 3D World and the new game Bowser's Fury. So, what's up with Bowser's Fury? This isn't the most ambiguous game in terms of what the consensus around it is, but it is the one I'm personally most unsure of. Here's the main points for and against it. Bowser's Fury does not exist as a standalone game. You cannot just get Bowser's Fury. You have to get it bundled with Super Mario 3D World. So in terms of what the product itself is, Bowser's Fury is the same game as the Switch port of 3D World. But why is that important? It's clearly a different game. It's two games included on one cartridge. like how Super Mario Bros. Was commonly bundled with Duck Hunt. However, Super Mario Bros. And Duck Hunt were also released separately. That's not the case for Bowser's Fury. Bowser's Fury is built off of the 3D World game engine, reusing many of its assets. But the gameplay is significantly different. It's a 3D collectathon instead of a linear course-clear platformer. Bowser's Fury is more different from 3D World than, say, Galaxy 2 is from Galaxy 1, or The Lost Levels is from Super Mario Bros. However, it should be emphasized again that Bowser's Fury does not exist by itself. It is one half of Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury. And honestly, calling it half is generous. Bowser's Fury is clearly a different game from 3D World, but can the same be said of the whole package? On the survey, I included two separate options for Bowser's Fury. One for just the game by itself, and another for 3D World plus Bowser's Fury. Most people selected at least one of those options. In fact, the two options collectively were included by more people than Super Mario Land 2. However, between the two different options, the results are inconclusive. The least common opinion was that Bowser's Fury on its own is a Super Mario game, but not the bundle. And the most common opinion was that neither Bowser's Fury nor the bundle are Super Mario games. So you could argue that this suggests that most people think that Bowser's Fury on its own is not a Super Mario game, but that the bundle that has it and the port of 3D World is. That said, it's not very clear, and I'm not confident in coming to any sort of conclusion about it beyond my own opinion, which is that Bowser's Fury isn't a separate game, so it shouldn't count. There is one more game which is ambiguous at the same level as to if it's a separate game or not, and this one is arguably an even bigger mess than Bowser's Fury. New Super Luigi U. This game was first released in 2013 as DLC for New Super Mario Bros. U. Then, later that same year, it was released as a standalone game. And then, still in 2013, the bundle New Super Mario Bros. U plus New Super Luigi U was released, with both Enzimbu and Enzlu on one disc. Then, in 2019, a port of New Super Mario Bros. U plus New Super Luigi U was made for the Switch, called New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe, a title which consists of three adjectives, a letter that refers to a console the game is not for, the instantly recognizable name of an internationally famous video game character, and the word bros. Unlike Bowser's Fury, New Super Luigi U does actually exist as its own standalone game. But also unlike Bowser's Fury, that standalone game is just the same game as New Super Mario Bros. U, but with different levels. And yeah, you could say the same thing about Galaxy 2 or The Lost Levels, but I think the similarities between Luigi U and Mario U are significantly more than those other cases. But still, a lot of people say the different levels and the Luigified physics are enough for Luigi U to be counted as a separate game, and that's completely understandable. Of course, there's another sillier argument against this game. You're not playing as Mario in New Super Luigi U, you're playing as Luigi, so it can't be a Mario game. Remember, this was one of the key points against Wario Land, so this really does matter. Between these, 4 versions of New Super Mario Bros. U, there's at most like 2 separate Super Mario games, right? I mean, I certainly think so. As you probably expected, there's no consensus about that. Most people either said that all 4 of them are Super Mario games, or that New Super Mario Bros. U is a Super Mario game, and that the rest of them are just different versions of that. I would like to focus on the third largest group here, however. The people who said that exactly 2 of these versions of New Super U count as Super Mario games. This group is split almost evenly between people who say the 2 Super Mario games in that set are Mario U and Luigi U, and people who say the 2 games are Mario U and Mario U Deluxe, with just slightly more people in the New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe camp. I don't really understand this viewpoint, that New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe is a separate Super Mario game from New Super Mario Bros. U, but not New Super Luigi U on its own, or the bundle that U Deluxe is a port of. That said, this is actually Nintendo's official stance on the matter. Both the Nintendo of America website and the Nintendo of Japan website's official lists of games in the Super Mario series include New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe, but not New Super Luigi U. My own take is that Luigi U and Bowser's Fury are the 2 games that come closest to being separate Super Mario games without actually being separate Super Mario games. These games are both incomplete without the games they come packaged with, even though Luigi U technically also exists as a standalone game. That said, I completely understand the viewpoint of people who include either or both of these, and I have changed my opinion on this matter multiple times over the course of making this video. New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe and Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury are both weird edge cases, but the funny thing is, there's another game that's far more unambiguously just a new version of an older game that's included more often than either of these games. That game is Super Mario 64 DS. This makes sense to me. 64 DS has tons of new content, with new graphics, new playable characters, new courses, new mechanics, and so on. I would say that remakes in general shouldn't be counted as separate entries, but there is a pretty strong argument you could make that Mario 64 DS is different enough from the original to be thought of as a distinct game. It's pretty clearly more different from Mario 64 than New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe is from New Super Mario Bros. U plus New Super Luigi U, that's for sure. Mario Mario 64 DS is one of the handful of Super Mario remakes and re-releases that some people consider to have enough new things to be counted separately, while also believing that remakes in general shouldn't count. New Super Luigi U and Bowser's Fury are simply the most extreme cases of this. But the question is, where do you draw the line? How different do two games need to be considered separate games? The Super Mario series has seen plenty of remakes, re-releases, and ports over the years. Many of these add new content to the games they're remaking. So when enumerating the Super Mario games, should these, in general, be counted? This is the case where the limitations of a simple binary checkbox survey question make interpreting the data difficult. Many people, myself included, would say that remakes and re-releases of Super Mario games are definitely Super Mario games, but they're not entries in the Super Mario series. So how people respond to the question depends on how they interpret it. The other remakes that are most commonly counted separately are Super Mario All-Stars, Super Mario Bros. Deluxe, and the Super Mario Advance series. Each of these has a substantial amount of differences from the games they're remaking. All-Stars is a full remake of 4 separate Super Mario games, bringing the NES and Famicom entries into the mid-90s. Notably, this is the first time The Lost Levels was released outside of Japan. Deluxe is a port of Mario 1 and The Lost Levels to the Game Boy Color, finally allowing people to play these classic games on a screen that's too small to see the game. There's also a decent amount of new content, including the U vs. Boo side mode. The Super Mario Advance games are where things get interesting, I think. There are 4 Game Boy Advance ports of different Mario games. 2 of them are ports of games originally released for the Super Nintendo, and the other 2 are ports of individual remakes from Super Mario All-Stars. There's a whole range of how much new stuff these remakes add. For the most part, they're the same as the SNES originals, but with new voice acting and slightly worse music. The one that has the most new stuff is Super Mario Advance 4 Super Mario Bros. 3. Wow, Nintendo is good at naming things. Advance 4 was the first Super Mario game to have DLC, which it implemented in the most archaic way possible. There was this card reader accessory for the GBA called the e-reader, and you could swipe cards that stored the data of individual levels to download to the game. It was this whole convoluted process, and when I played this game as a kid, literally nobody I knew had an e-reader, so I never played any of these levels. They were included in the Wii U port of this remake, though. Honestly, I think that if someone thinks New Super Luigi U or New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe should count as separate Super Mario games from New Super Mario Bros. U, there's no reason to not also include Super Mario Advance 4. And sure, throw in Mario 64 DS while you're at it. The rest of these remakes don't have as much going for them, but their inclusion as entries in the Super Mario series depends on what your standards are for what counts as a unique game. Is it original levels? Then Mario Deluxe, 64 DS, and Advance 4 are all Super Mario games. Naturally, there are several other remakes and re-releases that generally aren't thought of as separate games. It's mostly just these ones that people include in their lists of Super Mario games, unless, again, they consider remakes in general to count. I'm not sure if that's because of people actually thinking these remakes are the ones that differ the most from their corresponding original games, or if it's just a lack of familiarity with some of the more obscure remakes and re-releases. I'll talk about those obscure games later, since there's still a few pretty important games that haven't been brought up yet. For now, we'll just leave it at these remakes of the NES Famicom games, Mario World, Yoshi's Island, and Mario 64. Wait, Yoshi's Island? Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island is the single most ambiguous game regarding its inclusion in this series. Opinion surrounding this game is split almost exactly down the middle, with 49% saying it is a Super Mario game, and the other 51% saying it's not one. Wikipedia says this game is part of the Super Mario series, and the Super Mario Wiki says it isn't. Who's right, and why are so many other people wrong? Here's the main argument in favor of including Yoshi's Island. First of all, it's called Super Mario World 2. Practically everyone agrees that Mario World is unambiguously part of this series, and Yoshi's Island is a direct sequel to Mario World, so it has to also be part of this series. Additionally, multiple developers who worked on the game have said in interviews that they consider the game to be part of the core Mario series, including Shigeru Miyamoto himself. So that settles it, right? Primary source directly saying what the game is. But hold on, right? Because remember, there's official websites from Nintendo that have lists of Super Mario games, and both Nintendo of Japan and Nintendo of America's official lists exclude Yoshi's Island. So then what's the case against Yoshi's Island? Well, the biggest factor is that Yoshi's Island can't be a Super Mario game because you're not playing as Mario, you're playing as Yoshi. And there's a whole separate series of Yoshi games, including multiple direct sequels to Yoshi's Island. The way I see it, there's 5 different ways someone could analyze this game's relationship to the Super Mario series. Option 1, you could say that Yoshi's Island is not part of the Super Mario series because it's part of the completely separate Yoshi series. Option 2, you could say that, yeah, there is a Yoshi series that exists that's a distinct thing from the Super Mario series, but Yoshi's Island isn't a part of it because it's part of the Super Mario series instead. Option 3, you could say that Yoshi's Island is part of the Super Mario series and the Yoshi series. Nothing stopping a game from being in 2 series at the same time. Option 4, you could say that there is no divide between the Yoshi series and the Super Mario series. The 2 series are one and the same. And option 5, you could say that, yes, Yoshi's Island is part of the Yoshi series and not the Super Mario series, but it's also a sequel to Super Mario Mario World, so therefore, Super Mario World is also part of the Yoshi series and not the Super Mario series. Wait, do you hear that? Oh hey, it's Wario Land again. Hi there, Wario Land. So Wario Land is in a very similar position to Yoshi's Island. Both games have titles that suggest that they're sequels to Super Mario games, but completely different gameplay styles, and both games also were the starting point of completely separate series of games. So those 5 different analyses of Yoshi's Island all have direct parallels with Wario Land, and there's a lot of great insights we can find by comparing these. First of all, there's no reason why someone has to analyze these two games the same way. If you think Yoshi's Island is a Super Mario game, that doesn't mean it's completely irrational to not also think that Wario Land is a Super Mario game. Second, it's actually really common for people to use Wario Land as evidence that the first 2 Mario Lands can't be part of the Super Mario series, but that argument is almost never applied to Super Mario World, which is very interesting. Now, my survey didn't include any Yoshi's Island or Wario Land games beyond these ones, since the list of Super Mario games I used comes from the Super Mario Wiki's article about the series. However, a significant number of people wrote in that they consider some of the Yoshi's Island or Wario Land sequels to be part of the Super Mario series. So then, is Yoshi's Island a Super Mario game or not? What's the correct answer here? Well, obviously there isn't a correct answer. It's all subjective. You can choose to analyze these games however you want. Personally, I don't think it should count, and statistically about half of you will disagree with that, which is completely okay. More than okay. I think it's really cool how open to interpretation this is. That's like the whole point of this video. I don't want to just give you one list of Super Mario games and say that's the right answer. My goal here is to present the tools necessary for you to create your own. Was that a good transition? I'm talking about Mario Maker now. Most people agree that the Mario Maker games are not part of the Super Mario series, but there is still a lot of ambiguity surrounding them. Interestingly, Maker and Maker 2 are 2 of the 20 games that Wikipedia, the Super Mario Wiki, and the 2 Nintendo websites all agree are part of the series. The main thing going against the Maker games is their genre. While the Mario Makers do feature traditional 2D Mario platforming gameplay, playing courses isn't really the main appeal. The main appeal is creating your own courses. So the Mario Makers are often classified as creative tools instead of platformers. However, another way you could think about these games is as platformers that just happen to contain extensive level editors. Both Mario Makers have selections of original courses included in the base game, so you could theoretically play either of them without ever playing any online courses or creating any yourself. Mario Maker 2 is slightly more fleshed out in this aspect, featuring what can generously be described as a story mode. And if you're thinking of the Mario Maker games in terms of the levels that come packaged with the games themselves, then technically there is a third Super Mario Maker. Super Mario Maker for Nintendo 3DS. About a year after Mario Maker 1 was released for the Wii U, it was ported over to the 3DS. This is, practically speaking, just a worse version of Super Mario Maker. You couldn't upload levels online, you could only play levels people had uploaded from the Wii U version. Of course, this is now true for the original Mario Maker as well, but you know. Anyway, one thing this 3DS port has that the original doesn't is the Super Mario Challenge, which features a set of 100 completely new levels. So if that's the defining thing that makes 2 games distinct, then the 3DS version of Mario Maker is a different game from Mario Maker for Wii U. But like, that's obviously missing the point of Mario Maker. When people think about playing Super Mario Maker, I don't think most people think of the sample courses or Mario Maker 2's story mode. These games are about making original levels and playing levels made by random people online. And as for whether playing courses or making courses is the main focus, well, I mean, it's open for interpretation. All analyses of these games are valid. There's no clear answer here. It could go either way. Who's to say for sure what the focus of these games really is, truly? It's hard to say one way or the other. Oh yeah, remember Super Mario Run? You know, that mobile game from 2016? All 4 of the big sources for lists of Super Mario games call this game part of the Super Mario series. But is it? Very few people seem to think so. In the survey, it ranked lower than the cancelled Nintendo 64 DD sequel to Super Mario 64. It's not like definitely not a Super Mario game, but there's more agreement that this game isn't part of the series than there is for some of the games I was comfortable saying unambiguously are part of the series. So, okay, why isn't this game a Super Mario game? Nintendo has officially referred to it as a mainline entry in the series, so is that enough? Much like the Maker games, genre plays an important role here. While Super Mario Run is definitely a game with Mario in it that features jumping and platforms and the word super in the title, it's not exactly a 2D platformer. It's an auto-runner game, like Temple Run or Subway Surfers or, I don't know, Jetpack Joyride. It's one of those games. It's a whole established genre of mobile game is the point, and Mario Run has gameplay that's closer to those games than it is to Celeste or Sonic Mania or a third example of a 2D platformer. But does that actually matter? I mean, a whole bunch of games in this series are 3D collectathons, and very few people consider that to be a reason to exclude them. Is there something about auto-runners that makes them in particular too different from what Super Mario games are supposed to be? Another factor is an updated version of the home console purism of old. Super Mario Run is a mobile game. It's not a game for a real video game system. I disagree with this mindset, but it is a very common one nonetheless. And there's a lot of subtler things that this overlaps with. Super Mario Run was never released physically, it's not available for any Nintendo-created hardware, stuff like that. I think wholesale disregarding mobile games in general is a bit narrow-minded, but I completely get why Run in particular is generally not thought of as a core part of the Super Mario series. The thing with Mario Run not being made for Nintendo hardware in particular is an interesting point, actually, since there's a few other games where that's relevant. Super Mario Bros. Special is a sequel to Super Mario Bros. Developed by Hudson Soft for the PC 8801 and Sharp X1 computers. On the surface, it looks kinda like a port of Mario 1, and it's commonly confused for one, but it's not. It's a new game made with Mario 1's assets, similar to the Lost Levels. This game is really weird. It was officially licensed, but beyond that, Nintendo wasn't involved in its creation in any way. It's a relic from an era before Nintendo was as protective of their intellectual property as they are now. So hey, is this game part of the Super Mario series? This is another one I feel mixed about. Its gameplay is about as faithful to Mario 1 as you can expect for the hardware they were working on, but the fact that it wasn't developed or published by Nintendo makes it hard to justify calling it part of the actual series. But like, who cares what company owns the building that a game's developers works from? That's not how art works. Sure, Nintendo might be the copyright holder of the Super Mario brand, but games aren't actually made by corporations. They're made by people who are employed by corporations. That said, no, nobody who worked on Super Mario Bros. Special also worked on Mario 1. But also most Super Mario games weren't made by the people behind Mario 1. Two people were credited as programmers for Mario 1. Toshihiko Nakago hasn't been a programmer for a Mario game since 2004, and Kazuaki Morita hasn't been a programmer for a Mario game since 1995. Unless Yoshi's Island isn't a Mario game, then it was 1993. Also, Toshihiko Nakago is credited as the level design advisor for both of the new Soup games released in 2012. I don't know how much work that actually involves, but I don't think that counts as being a programmer. Anyway, while I don't really like using game companies to decide what games should count, basing it on what specific developers made a game would mean that, like, the last real Super Mario game was Mario 64, since that was the last time Shigeru Miyamoto had any sort of actual active role in the development of a Super Mario game and not just general producer or supervisor or game design concept. So for Super Mario Bros. Special, the hardware the game was made for is the clearest thing to point to as something that differentiates it from the canon Mario games. But even that feels like a strange thing to focus on. Like, seriously, the main reason to consider Super Mario Bros. Special to not be part of the series is just its vibes, you know? Like, maybe if some developer Nintendo granted the Mario license to back in the day actually managed to capture the same feeling as the Nintendo-developed Super Marios, then these games would be harder to dismiss. And naturally, I can't talk about Mario games made for non-Nintendo hardware without bringing up Hotel Mario.
You know what they say, all toasters toast toast.
Hotel Mario is a game for the CDI released in 1994, developed by Fantasy Factory and published by Royal Philips Electronics. It's mostly remembered for its animated cutscenes, immortalized through the tradition of YouTube poop. It's an arcade-style platformer, more similar to the Mario games from before Mario was Super than it is to any of the Super Mario games. That said, it is still a platformer starring Mario, so it deserves a mention. I didn't include Hotel Mario in my survey because, as I said before, that list of games comes from this article on the Super Mario Wiki. It is not my own. Nonetheless, Hotel Mario was one of the most common games people wrote in for other, with some specifying that they were only doing this as a joke, and others specifically saying that they're not doing this as a joke. Now, I did include a different CDI game on that survey, one which is not nearly as well known as Hotel Mario. Years before Hotel Mario was released, a sequel to Super Mario World began development for the CDI. This game was going to be called Super Mario's Wacky Worlds. It was in development for about half a year before being shelved in 1993. So is Super Mario's Wacky Worlds a Super Mario game? Like, it was going to be a sequel to Super Mario World, and the player character was Mario, so that should mean that it's at least as much of a Super Mario game as Yoshi's Island, right? The only problem is that this game doesn't exist. It was never finished or released. If it had been finished, it could have been a full entry in the Super Mario series, but it wasn't. All that exists of it is this clearly unfinished pre-alpha build. Super Mario's Wacky Worlds isn't the only potential Super Mario game that we know of that was never finished. It's joined by a Virtual Boy Mario Land game and the highly elusive planned sequel to Super Mario 64 for the Nintendo 64 DD. I think most people would say that none of these are part of the Super Mario series. Like, who cares that they would have been Super Mario games if they existed? They don't. There's infinitely many Super Mario games that could have been released but weren't. So unless you're satisfied with that, then there needs to be some sort of standard of existence for a game to be part of this series. So let me ask a different question. Is Super Mario Bros. 35 a Super Mario game? Super Mario Bros. 35 was an online multiplayer version of the original Super Mario Bros. Created for Switch as part of the 35th anniversary of the Super Mario series. This game doesn't exist. It did exist for a while, but it doesn't anymore. The game was taken offline and made completely impossible to play on April 1st, 2021. Is there a difference between Mario 35 and those unreleased games? And if so, what is it? There's a couple different relevant things here. The more significant one, I think, is that Mario 35 was actually completed and released at one point, even though it's impossible to play currently. The other is that, unlike those unreleased games, Mario 35 wasn't a completely original game. It was a different version of Super Mario Bros. Notably, the official Japanese Mario website lists Super Mario Bros. 35 as part of the Super Mario series, but the official American Mario website does not. Mario 35 is not the only Super Mario game that used to be available but isn't anymore. Also made for the 35th 25th anniversary of the series was Super Mario 3D All-Stars, a collection of slightly updated ports of 3 3D Super Mario games. This too was only available for a limited time. However, this game still exists. You can't buy it from Nintendo anymore, but you can still play it. You can still buy physical copies secondhand for way too much money. If the requirement for a game existing is the ability to buy a new copy directly from its original publisher, most video games don't exist. Yet there are other Super Mario games that are, just like Super Mario Bros. 35, completely impossible to play legally, due to being released through a games-as-service platform that has since been taken offline. These are the games released for the Satellaview. The Satellaview was an add-on for the Super Famicom that allowed gamers in Japan to tune in to games that were broadcasted through a satellite radio station. You could only download games that were currently being broadcasted, so each game was only available for a limited time. BS Super Mario USA was a slightly altered release of the All-Stars remake of Super Mario USA, released episodically, with 4 weekly installments broadcasted to the Satellaview throughout April 1996. While the gameplay was mostly identical to the All-Stars version, it took full advantage of the satellite broadcast format, featuring radio-quality background music and full voice acting. See, it wasn't just a game. BS Super Mario USA was also a radio drama, with a story that continued in each new episode, and stuff could happen in the game to line up with what was going on in the story. It's such a wild concept, it's almost ahead of its time. It's a shame that none of this stuff has resurfaced at all. None of the Satellaview games have. The other Super Mario game broadcasted through the Satellaview was BS Super Mario Collection.
BS Super Mario Collection.
This was the Satellaview version of the rest of Super Mario All-Stars, released in 4 weekly installments in January 1998, with the first part featuring Mario 1, the second and third being different parts of Mario 3, and the fourth being the Lost levels. Like BS Super Mario USA, it featured new music and full voice acting, as well as some completely original gameplay elements, like this completely unique world map for Mario 1. The Satellaview games were a bizarre period of Nintendo's history, and they do not exist anymore, just like Super Mario Bros. 35. But for the brief windows when it was possible to play these games legally, were they actually part of the Super Mario series? And if so, should they still be considered part of the series today? Luckily for me, I don't consider remakes or re-releases in general to count as separate games, so the status of these ethereal games doesn't change the number of Super Mario games I think there are one way or the other. But surely these games are at least as distinct from their respective original games as New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe, right? And on that topic, I guess we're back to the question of how much new content needs to be added to a game for it to count as a separate game. I've already mentioned most of the games that are generally included in this discussion, but there's several more. Super Mario All-Stars has been released a few different times. The Satellaview and Game Boy Advance versions of the remakes added a decent amount of new content, but the other versions are really just Super Mario All-Stars again. There was that time it was bundled with a slightly different version of Super Mario World on the SNES, and there was also the Wii version that was just a Super Nintendo ROM on a Wii disc. And honestly, All-Stars and Mario 64 DS are really the only Super Mario games that I feel completely comfortable calling full remakes and not just enhanced ports. Other people will draw the line in other places, and that's obviously completely fine. Outside of the remakes already discussed, the majority of remaining Super Mario re-releases are pretty unambiguously not separate games. The various virtual consoles, the Nintendo Switch Online games, those weird GBA ports of Mario 1 and Lost Levels, the classic mini plug-and-play consoles, and so on. Mario 1 and the Lost Levels specifically have had an absurd number of different releases. I've already talked about the Game Boy Color version, and I very briefly just now mentioned the Game Boy Advance versions, but there's a couple others that have a bit more potential to be considered separate games. One notable one is the arcade version from 1986, versus Super Mario Bros. It might look like yet another direct port of Mario 1, like the PlayChoice 10 version for instance, but it has several changes, both major and minor, to the level design. Its levels are mostly from Mario 1 with minor tweaks to make them harder, but a handful are from the Lost Levels instead, and the levels aren't in the same order they were in originally. It's also the game this version of the Mario 1 ground theme is from. Much more obscure is All Night Nippon Super Mario Bros. This game is an officially licensed ROM hack of the Lost Levels that replaces some of the sprites with different Japanese celebrities who had appeared on the radio program All Night Nippon. It's kinda like versus Super Mario Bros. In some ways. The levels are taken from both Mario 1 and Lost Levels, but for All Night Nippon it's mostly Lost Levels instead of mostly Mario 1. The levels are in a different order again, and there's some minor tweaks to their general layout. I don't really know what to make of this game, but now you also know that it exists, so I don't have to bear this knowledge alone. Oh right, I can't forget the most recently released version of Mario 1 and the Lost Levels, the 35th anniversary Game & Watch Super Mario Bros. I guess this handheld is kinda like Mario Deluxe in that it includes both Mario 1 and Lost Levels separately, with some random extra bonus features. That said, I don't think any of those new features are enough to make this a new game. It's definitely less of a new game than versus Super Mario Bros. Or the other one. In contrast to Game & Watch Super Mario Bros., we can look at Super Mario Bros. Game & Watch. Unlike Game & Watch Super Mario Bros., Super Mario Bros. Game & Watch is a very different game from the NES game it shares its title with. In fact, there's really no ambiguity with this one. Super Mario Bros. Game & Watch is very clearly not the same game as Super Mario Bros. NES. But is it a Super Mario game? It is a platformer, kinda, that features Mario as the main character, and it has Super Mario in the title. Game & Watch games are often ignored when discussing Nintendo's old franchises, and I absolutely believe that these pocket-sized games can still have value and shouldn't be overlooked. But, are Game & Watches video games? Like, isn't a video game a game with video? Game & Watches don't have video, not really. I mean, the new fake promotional Game & Watches Nintendo is doing now have video, but I'm not talking about those. Okay, here's a question. If we say Super Mario Bros. Game & Watch is a Super Mario game, what about Super Mario Bros. Game Watch? You know, the Nelsonic Game Watch? It's the thing from...
You say Zelda Game & Watch, what about the Zelda Game Watch? That's right, the Nelsonic Zelda Game Watch.
Yeah, it's that. The Nelsonic Game Watches were these watches that had games on them, which is a completely different thing from what the Game & Watches were. And yes, some of these games were based on Mario games. It's very hard to find literally anything about them because absolutely nobody cares at all about the Nelsonic Game Watch games, but hey, are these part of the Super Mario series? Also, fun fact, one of these is based on Super Mario World, and apparently it was released internationally as Super Mario Bros. 4. So technically, this is the only game that was officially sold outside of Japan with that title. This wristwatch that I couldn't find any good pictures of, a game too obscure to have a dedicated article on the Super Mario Wiki, is the true Super Mario Bros. 4. But wait!
You say Super Mario Brothers Game & Watch, and you say Game & Watch Super Mario Brothers. And you say Super Mario Brothers Game Watch. What about the Super Mario Brothers Watch? That's right.
The McDonald's Happy Meal Super Mario Bros. Watch. Is this part of the Super Mario series? Is this trilogy of wrist-mounted Super Mario games canon or not? Can somebody please acknowledge the existence of Mario's Egg Catch, Luigi's Hammer Toss, and Princess Toadstool's Castle Run? There are so many of these games is the thing. You have no idea how massive the Mario franchise is. If your idea of the Super Mario series is just games with Mario in them, there are hundreds of Super Mario games. And we're back at the start with the idea that maybe it doesn't make sense to say that the Super Mario series is a thing in the first place. That said, we can go further with this without just saying that every single Mario game is also a Super Mario game. I've already gone over all the ones I included on the survey, but there's still a few specific categories that... Oh wait, I haven't gone over all the ones I included in the survey. Captain Toad Treasure Tracker was also on there. Treasure Tracker was the game that the fewest people consider to be a Super Mario game, which makes perfect sense. I absolutely agree. The reason it's listed by the Super Mario Wiki with the other games is that it's like a full game version of something that started as a small section in Super Mario 3D World. But it's still really weird that the wiki considers this game to be related to the Super Mario series, but not Super Princess Peach or the Luigi's Mansion games or indeed Hotel Mario. Like, come on, at least Wikipedia's Super Mario series template has the decency to call Super Princess Peach a major spin-off. Although Wikipedia's Super Mario series template also calls Yoshi's Island not a spin-off, so there's a few specific categories that some people single out as part of the mainline Super Mario series. Earlier I dismissed the idea of someone calling the Mario Karts or parties part of the main series, but it's not that out there. I disagree, I think calling these different series makes way more sense, but there are worse ways you could think about the Super Mario series. Unrelated, a lot of people consider the RPGs to be part of the main series. Once again, I think this is a case where an analysis that calls these multiple separate series just makes more sense, but I can see why someone else might want to include these. Super Paper Mario gets a special mention since it's another platformer with both Super and Mario in the title. Also, for some reason, a lot of people brought up some of the edutainment games. I'm assuming that's mostly a joke, but Mario Teaches Typing was the single most commonly included writing game for the survey, with Hotel Mario very close behind. I guess some of the edutainment games are more like platformers. The NES version of Mario's Time Machine looks vaguely like a platformer, kinda, so, sure, this one could work, I guess. Another big group is platformers from before Super Mario Bros. The un-Super Mario Bros. Arcade game and its blatantly anti-capitalist Game & Watch predecessor have the strongest case, since they are the games that Super Mario Bros. Is the super version of. Granted, the Game & Watch original isn't a platformer, but the branding is still very strong here. It is not hard to argue that Super Mario Bros. Is meant to be a direct sequel to at least one of these two unrelated games with the same title. There's also some other non-Super Mario Bros. Games. I'm not going to list all of them here because I explicitly do not want this video to turn into just a list of every single game in the Mario franchise, but a bunch of people will yell at me in the comments if I don't say Punchball Mario Bros. At some point. The other extremely significant Mario game from before Mario was Super is Donkey Kong, the game Mario first appeared in. I think the separation between the Donkey Kong series and the Super Mario series is pretty clear, but it's still important to not forget where it started, so it makes sense to include it. The main point I want to make against Donkey Kong being the first Super Mario game, rather than simply the first Mario game, is that every series within the Mario franchise can be traced back to Donkey Kong. Like, is Donkey Kong also the first Mario Kart game? Is it the first Mario Party game? I think the analysis that makes the most sense is that the Super Mario series is a spin-off of the Donkey Kong series. series. The connection of being the same genre, platformer, is important, but I don't think genre alone is enough. Obviously, a lot of people disagree with that, which I actively encourage. If you want to argue that every platformer in the Mario franchise is part of the mainline Super Mario series, please do. I just want you to be aware of exactly what that entails, because this franchise has a lot of platformers. The Donkey Kong series in particular has a lot of strange edge cases. Sure, this game may be a platformer where you play as Mario, but Donkey Kong Jr. and Donkey Kong 3 definitely aren't. And that's not to even mention the entire Donkey Kong Country series. I think the most interesting rabbit hole here is found with Donkey Kong for the Game Boy. I think a lot of people who don't know about this game assume that it's a port of the arcade game, but it's not. It's a full sequel with like 100 different levels. Its scope is honestly really impressive. And yeah, this is a platformer game where you play as Mario, putting it in the running to qualify as a Super Mario game. There was a spiritual successor of sorts to Game Boy Donkey Kong for the Game Boy Advance called Mario vs. Donkey Kong. If you've heard of the vs. Donkey Kong games before, you can probably predict where this is going. So this game is about how Mario set up his own toy company that manufactures these mini Mario toys, and Donkey Kong steals all of them, so Mario has to get them back. So the whole game you're going through these puzzle platformer levels getting these mini Marios, and then after you've done a few of those, there's a level where you have to guide all of the mini Marios you rescued and the other levels to the goal, just as like a little side mode thing. So then Mario vs. Donkey Kong 2 comes out, and it's all about guiding mini Marios through puzzle platform challenges. And that is what the Mario vs. Donkey Kong games have continued to be. This series has successfully Ship of Theseus'd itself from a revamped take on the original Donkey Kong into Mini Mario and Friends Amiibo Challenge. Also, Wrecking Crew exists. Mario is there. There are hundreds of Mario games that exist, and even more that don't. Most gamers agree that some, but not all of these games, make up some sort of nebulous series of games that either mostly or entirely consists of platformers. However, there is no consensus regarding which games are part of this series, which is not only okay, but really cool. There's a list of 18 games that happens to be the most commonly held model of what this series is, but almost everyone disagrees with it at least a little bit. Some people consider the New Soups to be separate, and some people consider some or all of the 3D Marios to be separate. New Super Luigi U and Bowser's Fury are weird, and it's very ambiguous if either of them should be thought of as full games or not. Separately, many remakes and ports of Super Mario games have significant added content. Opinion on these games' status ranges from excluding all of them to including all of them. In the maximal case, there is no meaningful number of Super Mario games that you can give due to just how many times Nintendo has re-released their old games in slightly different forms. Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island is the single most ambiguous game with regards to its relationship to this series, with opinion on its inclusion split almost exactly in half. Wario Land Super Mario Land 3 is a game in a very similar position, but including it as part of the Super Mario series is not nearly as common. Official sources additionally include the Mario Maker games and Super Mario Run, which is not in line with how most people think about those games, though significant groups of people do still include them. There are also several games that are extremely obscure, so they're generally not thought of as part of the Super Mario series. However, it's likely that if more people knew that these games existed, they would have similar amounts of controversy surrounding them as there is for games like Yoshi's Island. The level of ambiguity surrounding the Super Mario series is fascinating, and is only increasing with time. You're probably watching this in the future, so it's a safe guess that between when this video is made and the time you're watching it, another Super Mario game has been released that we here in the past don't know about yet, and there's a very good chance that it'll be another weird edge case like Bowser's Fury or Super Mario Bros. 35. Either that, or it'll be the first truly unambiguous entry in the series since 1990. When a Mario game's status of being part of the Super Mario series or not is completely uncontroversial, that's the exception, not the rule. I've been Misali, and please stop saying that Jumpman and Mario are different characters. It doesn't make any sense, and there's so much stuff in the text of these games that directly contradicts it.